Well, our final formal segment of the show, which is traveling Road of the King,
It's time to travel the road of the king.
as we talk about in-game resources. So, in-game resources, for those of you following with the book, it is a page 140. We go in no particular order on this show. We don't know how to count, so following page numbers is pretty difficult over here at Bemani Lounge. And it's chapter 11, and it starts off with a great quote from Charlie Munger. It is responsible how much a long-term advantage. It is remarkable how much a long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. So this is a quote that symbolizes how people use their card resources. So this chapter talks about how it's important to accumulate advantage of course across the across a game and throughout a tournament, of course. And the more resources that you get, the more of a winning spot you put yourself in. And Patrick Hoban goes on to say that as soon as you get an extra card, whether you search a card or draw an extra card or whether you destroy a monster by battle, it's a +1. And the name of the game is you want to get as many +1s as possible. And life points don't matter until they hit 0. And you want to just put yourself in as a as advantageous of a spot as possible when it comes to card resources. However, he goes on to say that the usefulness of card advantage is inherently limited, as it is only a measure of quantity and not quality. So, if player A has 2 Legion, the mystical genie of the lamp, in their hand, and player B has 1 Gemini elf on the field, which has higher attack and higher defense, who is winning? Player A has more cards, but player B has a better monster than both options player A has. So player A has no meaningful way to convert this additional card into something useful. So card advantage is insufficient in a number of other ways, such as usefulness. If you have mystical space typhon in your hand and your opponent doesn't have any sets, then it's not very useful. So let's talk about how card advantage works in general, and then we'll apply it to the format. So in general, it's not a secret that the person with the most cards in their hand is usually winning the game. I would say the exception of this is with the toxic time rules that we have in the game, and life points are more of take more of an important role. So, what do you think when did you understand card advantage as being the most important aspect of the game? I feel like you learned this pretty early on in your competitive Yu-Gi-Oh career. What do you think?
Yeah, so I came into the game competitively around the time that Pot of Desires was released, and I remember there was a furious debate in the community whether Pot of Desires was worth it. And at first, like, I wasn't against the card, I just didn't really understand why it was so good. Because like I saw like, oh, you're banishing 10 cards out of your deck, like doesn't that like hurt you? But people would explain to me like you're not going to draw those cards anyway unless you have a way to draw them, or
Right.
unless you're like able to stall the game out for 20 turns. And so like I would rather just have the cards now. And watching like D's Eve's channel where he basically explained the concept of card advantage, like it doesn't matter what's in your deck. Your deck is not a resource, right? So when I activate Pot of Desires, I might banish, all 3 copies of a card. Like when I played Thunder Dragons, I played 2 copies of Desires, and there was plenty of games where I banished all 3 copies of Dragon Dark, which is like, best card in your deck, searches everything in your deck. And that Pot of Desires still won me that game.
Right.
Never resolved the Dragon Dark in those duels, but I still won because I got the extra cards I needed. And that +1, that raw power is so good. That's why Pot of Greed has been banned for so long, like since what 2005, and it's never coming back. They've just decided to reprint like different versions of Pot of Greed that have different restrictions. But like would you not play Pot of Extravagance in like Subterrors or in Altergeist or any of those control decks just because you can't draw for the rest of the turn? Like no, you find ways to get around it.
Or banish your extra deck
And
cards.
or banish your extra deck cards, because like you don't summon from the extra deck in those. So it's about finding your way around the restrictions and playing them in the right deck.
Right.
But getting back to the point, card advantage, that's how I first learned about it, was through the context of Pot of Desires and seeing that, like, even though you're banishing a quarter of your deck or 1/6 of your deck, I guess if you're playing 60 cards, that draw could be the difference between you winning or losing that game. And the fact that Ash Blossom is like a magnet to Pot of Desires should tell you everything you need to know.
Right.
Same with Pot of Extravagance. Like, no good player is going to be like, oh yeah, I'm not going to Ash the Desires. That's a bad card. I don't care about that card. Like, if I see Desires, I am always seriously considering ashing it if I have Ash, unless I'm expecting that they're like trying to bait me and there's something better in their deck I could ash. Like, almost always, I'm just going to ash that. Same with the Extravagance, and that's why those cards are so powerful, because not all they gain you a +1. You
Right.
start with 5 cards, you activate your Desires or whatever, and you banish your 10. Those cards are never in your hand no matter what. You draw 2 cards, and then the Desires goes to the graveyard. If you started with 5 cards, you now have 6 cards. That is one more option that you're able to have. And, sure, sometimes you draw Desires off Desires, but it doesn't happen every time, and that's not a correct argument to say that Desires is not good.
Right.
Variance is not an argument, right?
Right.
But it does bring up the question of the quality of your cards. I once was playing Subterras at the at YCS Chicago 2019, and I played against Imran Khan, and he was still on Spiral at that point, and he was super cool. But game one, he went first. He did the whole crazy Spiral combo, and I just drew nothing. It was fine. Game two, I opened 2 Pot of Extravagance, no Hidden City, just like 2 Floodgates, and then I activate Pot of Extravagance. He has no response. I draw 2 cards. It's a copy of another Floodgate that I already had, and then the 3rd Extravagance. Does that situation mean that it's incorrect to play 3 Extravagance? Of course not.
No.
But it does highlight the importance of the quality of your resources.
Right.
So the reason that, for example, like Eldritch is so strong is that normally when you activate a card, it goes to the graveyard if it's like a normal spell, and then you don't get to use it again. But in the case of Eldritch, Scarlet Sanguine banishes itself, and which is no minus to you because it's already in the graveyard, and then it puts another card on your field. So that is a +1 by itself. It activating gets a Golden Lord out of your deck. So it's a 0 in card advantage there, but then later it banishes itself to get you a +1. And that being the case, every one of those Eldritch cards, the Golden Lands and the Eldlixirs, they banish themselves to get the other half of the deck onto your field. So they're all +1s once they've hit the graveyard. And even though they're hard once per turns on all of their effects, and in some cases you can only use one of their effects once per turn, the fact that you get to choose your resources is what makes it so strong. So like every single turn, it's like you're never losing advantage. They just keep replacing themselves and giving you the +1 rather than you activate it, goes to the graveyard, it's done. Like one single card there just starts this loop that just never stops until you run out of copies of those cards. And that's why the deck is so strong, because it just keeps recurring this advantage, which I think is really cool because, I love zombies. And that's kind of the point of zombies. They keep coming back. They won't die. In the case of Adamancipator, every single one of those Adamancipator monsters is basically a guaranteed +1, right? Because you play so many generic level 4 or lower rock non-tuners. You have 3 copies of Doki Doki, you have 3 copies of Kawaki Mirror Guardian, and then there are other rock monsters that are in the deck as well. So every single one of them, if they resolve successfully, they get you a +1. And they might be a hard once per turn, but because they're consistently able, like every single card gets you a +1, if you ash one of them, you can just drop another one and activate the effect again. So having that many levels of resource generation is just so strong, and that's why these decks are the top decks of the format. If they tributed themselves to Excavate 5 and Special Summon 1, it wouldn't be nearly as good. But because it's just a free body on board, or in the case of Eldritch, it's free spells and traps that just reset themselves, that resource game is so strong.
I agree.
So, yeah, Henry, what are
when
your
when
thoughts about
when
that?
when it comes to, I think there are different rules when it comes to combo versus when it comes to control. So obviously, I agree card advantage is very important. And then when it comes to quality over quantity, I think there has to be a balance, of course, as Patrick Coleman mentions as well. And when it comes to control, like you said with Eldlick, all the cards get you to another card. So card advantage wise, it's good. And the effects of the cards are pretty good too. Like the interruptions that you put up are destroy a face of card or banish a card in the graveyard. Those are two good options in every single game. They have great utility, and Golden Lord is also very good for going second. So the deck has very good functionality. I feel like when it comes to combo, you want to convert your cards into a really good extra deck monster. So one of the all-time best decks, not only when it comes to card advantage, but also when it comes to converting your card advantage, would be Sky Striker. So Sky Striker used to have 3 engage, which was almost a better pot of greed because getting specific cards is always better than getting random cards. And you would always guarantee one specific card. And then if you had 3 spells engraved, you would also get another draw, which would be a random card. So that's why Engage is one of the best cards ever. It's not once per turn, and it's searchable. So Engage was amazing. And once Engage went to 0, people assumed Sky Striker was dead. However, the reason why Sky Striker, I believe, won the LCS with Ryan Yu is because the truth about Sky Striker is that still have all of their utility. They have 2 Widow Anchor, they have Afterburner, they have Jamming Wave, they have Shark Cannon, they have Hornet Drones at 1. They have everything they need to be a Swiss Army knife. What they lacked before was no engage. However, with the addition of Halqa-Fibrax in their deck, all it takes is for them to survive 1 turn, which is very hard, which is very easy to do. It's hard to OTK Sky Striker through Ray and any kind of back row or any kind of hand trap. And Ryan Yu played a bunch of hand traps, which served a dual purpose. They stopped his opponent from killing him, and they also started his Halqa-Fibrax play for turn 3. And this is how he converted his resources. He would use his extra hand trap to start his play, and that would bring him to Halqa-Fibrax, and that would bring him to Axis Code Talker. And if you read Axis Code Talker, it actually just says win the game because you have so many Sky Striker different attribute links in Graveyard. They're a bunch of link
Yep.
ones, so they're so
You're
free to.
guaranteed to pop 3 or 4 cards.
Exactly. So he found a way to abuse a tuner. So it sounds weird because Engage, like that's the bread and butter of the deck, and that's what starts your engine. But it's not even needed now because of how much free advantage Halqa-Fibrax gives you. You're not spending any real card advantage into putting up, a Sky Striker link. All it takes is Ray as Bay, and then you survive 1 turn, and then you have to commit 1 more resource, and that's your Halqa-Fibrax play. And if it gets stopped, you still have your Striker back row, and all of your. If you have another Ray, then you're back in the game. So it's low risk, high reward, high utility, high card advantage, and you're converting your resources. Like you could play a deck, like you could activate Thunder Dragon to add 2 more Thunder Dragons, but those 2 Thunder Dragons in your hand aren't going to do anything unless you have a way to convert them. So say you have Chaos Dragon Levianeer in your hand, you get to set up your graveyard with Thunder Dragon, and then you get to blow your opponent out with a Chaos Dragon Levianeer. So but that needs more setup. You need to draw specific Levianeer. So Sky Strikers is so generically good just because they have the Swiss Army knife of options. They convert their options at any point in the game. They can go Hayate, send Afterburner, send Jamming Wave, or if they already have those options, if they're ahead in the game, they can solidify the game by sending multi-roll, and then they reset their entire field, and it's obscene. So Access Code Talker is one
Yeah.
of those cards that you can build your deck around to make up for, a lack in power or a lack in, being able to convert. So Sky Strikers is definitely one of the best decks, in my opinion, right now, just because of how simple of a game they play. They get to play a lot of hand traps. They are going to take over any kind of game against control. Like if you play against Guru or if you play against Altergeist, Sky Striker
I always hated that matchup.
usually has the
Hated
high
the
hand there.
matchup against Sky Striker.
Yeah, so Sky Striker is a very good matchups all across the board, and I actually do think it's a very good meta call. Once I saw how it worked with Halka Firebrax and Celine and just Effect Veiler, it's very simple but very effective, and I kudos to Ryan for piloting that deck. And now everyone's playing this deck on Dueling Book and online. It's just a widely played deck. So yes, I agree. Striker is good, and it's a great deck when it comes to analyzing card advantage because you do have to convert your resources at the end of the day. Another deck that I think does it very well is Salomon Great. They have Salomon Great Roar and Salomon Great Rage, two cards that are very good trap cards that interact very well with the meta. You have a hard negate, you have an omni negate, and you have a Steeds or a Fire Lake. A card that just pops any kind of card is very good, and they will always convert their resources. They have update jammer to OTK. They have very set plays to do. It's a little linear and it's a little predictable. However, if you're looking to just play every game and do that consistently, you're going to win a lot of games over the course of a tournament. So I definitely agree that card advantage is key, and converting your resources, converting your card advantage into actually taking over the game state is also very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't think I could have said it better myself.